This is a Mountain Lake PBS Vote 2012 election special, a debate among the candidates running for Northern New York's 115th Assembly District.
Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Thom Hallock with Mountain Lake PBS. Along with our partners, the League of Women Voters, for the next hour, we're going to bring you a debate among the three candidates running for the New York Assembly in the new 115th District that covers all of Clinton and Franklin counties and 4 towns in St. Lawrence County in northern New York. Let's begin by meeting our three candidates, the challengers, Tim Carpenter, a Democrat from Plattsburgh, Karen Bisso, the Conservative Party nominee from Plattsburgh, and the incumbent Republican Janet Duprey from Peru. Let's also meet our panelists who will ask the questions, beginning with Joe Lotemplio with the Plattsburgh Press Republican, Pat Bradley, who is the North Country Bureau Chief with public radio station WAMC, and Betty Ann King with the League of Women Voters. We also have volunteers from the League of Women Voters who are the official timers. Let's begin with the ground rules. The candidates will get 2 minutes for opening and closing statements, have a minute to answer questions, and 30 seconds for rebuttal. We drew straws to decide who goes first, and we begin with Mr. Carpenter. Your opening statement.
Good morning. For those that don't know me, my name is Tim Carpenter. I'm running for Assembly here in the 115th District. I was born and raised in Plattsburgh, New York, where I live on Main Mill Street. In fact, I'm the 4th generation of my family to live there. I currently am employed by the New York State Department of Correctional Services. I work at Franklin Correctional in Malone. I decided to get involved in the Assembly race because I saw some things that I thought I could change. My platform is based on 3 things. The first thing is jobs. We need jobs in this area. We need jobs in the state. The second thing is jobs. And the third is most definitely jobs. We all know that the state is in trouble. We all know that the federal government is in a tailspin. We know the economy's poor. We have high unemployment rates. If we can put those people to work, it can help us in many different ways. One is that it cuts down on the amount of money that we're paying on unemployment for every person we put on. 2 is that every person that gets a job and goes back to work will have a higher disposable income. They'll be spending money in the economy. They'll be stimulating the economy. It will increase sales tax figures that help out all our municipalities. It will cause an increase in demand for products and services. It will cause those companies and places that provide those services and products to, in turn, add more people to answer the demand. And the whole thing tumbles over and over as we keep increasing. So the key really is, at this point, we need to get people employed. We spend a lot of money in our education system here in New York State because we want our children to be able to compete in the workplace. We've gone through in the last couple of years and looked at the way we educate. We're trying to do the best we can. We're coming up with new tests for the kids and the teachers. Where are they going to get these jobs? With all this money we're invested in them, I hate the thought that we're going to invest so that they have to leave to a different state. We need to invest in our spot here. Bring in jobs.
Mr. Carpenter, thank you very much for your opening statement. Now we're going to hear from Mrs. Duprey.
Thank you to Mountain Lake PBS, the League of Women Voters, and the panelists for allowing us to participate in this debate. For some reason, a political career is the only profession where longevity, the value of seniority, good qualifications, and success are considered a liability. In all other jobs, these are seen as valuable assets. I've had the privilege of serving in the Assembly for 6 years following a 31-year career in county government. I was the first woman elected to the Clinton County Legislature, where I served 5 terms prior to serving 21 years as county treasurer. My husband and I just celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary. We're the proud parents of 2 successful adult children, our son John and our daughter Michelle. We have 3 wonderful granddaughters and a terrific grandson. I've served on many local volunteer boards, including CVPH, Pine Harbor, Apple Valley Senior Housing, Red Cross, Hospice, Nursing Advisory Committees at Clinton Community and SUNY Plattsburgh, and the recently formed SUNY Spectrum Committee that supports the Nexus Asperger's Program, the Traumatic Brain Injury Center, and the Alzheimer's Center. Although an important and the most visible part of the Assembly position takes place in Albany, passing the budget and voting on legislation, the most satisfying part of the position takes place in the district, assisting individuals, businesses, not-for-profit organizations, local governments, and school districts. Working with local constituents on an incredibly wide variety of issues is when I know I have the real opportunity to directly affect the quality of life for people living and working in the North Country.
Mrs. Duprey, thank you very much. We'll now hear from Mrs. Bisso.
Thank you very much. Most elected representatives believe that it's all about them, when in actuality it is not. It is all about you. It's about farmers in the 115th Assembly District who have a 25% shorter growing season. Their prices come in 20% below the national average. Their properties are valued 60% less than their counterparts across the United States. And here in the state of New York, we tax them 50% greater than any place else in the country. It's about senior citizens who struggle every single day to pay for medication, to heat their homes, to pay their rent or their mortgages because of increased property taxes and increased school taxes. It's about veterans who take care of their own every single day, trying to get them to good medical services, providing them with transportation and a hot meal along the way. And then those veterans spend the last 8 to 10 years trying to put together a plot of land in the North Country where they can bury their fallen, only to be laden with all sorts of bureaucracy from the state of New York. It's about small business owners who sadly have left the state because we let them down with increased property taxes and overregulation. And it's about those very small businesses who stayed in the state of New York, like Jefford Steel and Tri-Town Meatpacking Company and Wells Communication and Dragoon Farm Equipment, who stayed here and didn't take a penny of taxpayer dollars to do it. It's about our children who I've dedicated the last 27 years of my life to, who sadly leave this state constantly to find jobs elsewhere. It's about all of you, and most certainly it's about taxpayers. And it's about people who pay taxes who have jobs and people who pay taxes who struggle even with the jobs that they have. And I've traveled this district, I've listened to all of you, and I hope to bring you here today and proudly represent you during today's debate. Thank you.
Mrs. Bisso, thank you very much. We are going to begin now with the questions from our panelists, beginning with Joe Lotemplio. Joe?
Thanks, Tom. First question, I'd like to talk about taxes and budgets. Last year, New York State enacted a tax cap based on 2% with some other factors for growth and payments in lieu of taxes. And everybody patted themselves on the back, saying, hey, we got this tax cap. But municipal leaders said loudly, it's great, but we need mandate relief, serious mandate relief along with it. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. And we didn't see much mandate relief, at least that's what the municipal leaders say. How do we deal with mandate relief in Albany?
Mr. Carpenter, we begin with you. 1 minute.
In order to change mandate relief, that's going to be a tough one. And again, you're going to hear this a lot from me. It's going to come down to jobs. If we can employ people, we can change the way taxes are levied. We can change the amount of money that comes into the tax system. Here in Plattsburgh, I'm a counselor, and I deal with some of those mandates. And one thing I'd like to point out is that without a tax cap, we in Plattsburgh have been able to keep our taxes to under the 2% anyway. The one thing that really trips us up is the retirement. Cost of retirement has risen incredibly in the last 5-10 years in New York State. And the state has made it so that that's not part of what our tax cap is. I kind of wish Albany would follow the same route that they want all the municipalities underneath them to follow and stay with a 2% tax cap. To me, that would be an awesome thing.
Mr. Carpenter, thank you. Mrs. Bisso.
Well, I think when you're talking about mandate relief, you have to talk about Medicaid. I mean, in Clinton County alone, their budget is 55% of their, Medicaid is 55% of their budget, and it's likewise in Franklin County and St. Lawrence County. Mandate relief is going to be necessary in the form of Medicaid in order to bring down property taxes. I see it all the time in education. I work in the education field. They tell us no new mandates. This year alone, we received 13 additional mandates just in the month of September from the governor. So mandate relief is not happening. It's a good, clear articulation that needs to happen from the municipalities, from the counties down to Albany in order to clearly show them what it is their lack of mandate relief is doing to the population. So I would say a great plan would be to develop either baby steps or leaps of faith, which I've talked about before with regard to Medicaid, and I think that will help with some level of mandate relief. Baby step would be making sure that everybody needs a 1-year residency requirement in the state of New York in order to access Medicaid, and a leap of faith would be to make sure that New York's Medicaid program mirrors what the federal government requires us to provide and not what New York State decides it's going to provide as a Cadillac of programs.
Thank you. Mrs. Duprey.
The property tax cap was the most difficult vote I've taken in the Assembly. After 31 years in county government, I understood how difficult it was going to be for our local municipalities and our school districts to put a budget together without being able to raise taxes. About 85% of the people who contacted my office about that legislation favored a tax cap. Taxpayers feel they just can't afford any additional taxes. They can't continue to raise them the way they were. Mandate relief is an interesting thing because we have to recall for every mandate somebody thought it was a good idea. And so we have done some Medicaid relief. The counties over the next 3 years will see some substantial savings as the state continues to pick up more. It, by the way, is unconstitutional and has been struck down by the courts to have a 1-year residency for people who move into the state before they are eligible. We've only scratched the surface. We need to look at reducing the cost of pensions, of health care costs. We need to get rid of redundant and conflicting regulations between agencies that really affect our businesses.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter, 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, it really would be nice to have mandate relief, and I understand the way some of it works, that these things are necessary, and there's probably no way around a few of them, but in Plattsburgh, we've been stung pretty hard by the unfunded mandates that we've been told we have to do, and I sure would like to see a change to that.
Thank you. Mrs. Bisso?
2% tax cap has not been effective, especially in St. Lawrence County, where we just found out the other day that if they don't raise their property taxes by 1% in order to take care of an $8 million fund deficit, that they're going to have to raise property taxes 20%. If they're allowed to raise 1%, then they can turn around and raise property taxes 5.09%. So to me, it's been a smoke and mirrors from the state of New York. Make sure that the county governments pick up what the state won't pay for and then put a 2% tax cap on them, and even then it's not working.
And Mrs. Duprey.
The priority next session has got to be meaningful mandate relief. The governor promised it right after the tax cap was passed. Hasn't happened. If it doesn't soon, then there's going to be drastic cuts in services, and we can't, as a New York State Assembly and Senate, allow that to happen.
Thank you very much. Our next question will begin with Mrs. Bisso. It will be coming from Pat Bradley from WAMC Public Radio. Pat?
Good evening. New York State has a history of land purchases in the Adirondack Park, the most recent of which is 69,000 acres, which Governor Cuomo visited and touted, which the Adirondack Park Local Government Review Board has criticized. Should New York State continue to purchase land in the Adirondack Park?
Absolutely not. 69,000 acres just went for the Finch Prine land deal for $49.6 million. And they say that it's going to not affect local municipalities because the state will continue to pay for the taxes for those municipalities. Well, where does that money come from? Because the state is not a producer of anything. The state is a consumer. So those taxes are going to come from us. So not only did they lose the tax base which was being paid for by the Nature Conservancy, then they turn around and they have to pay for the land which they needed to take out a loan for. Then they have to turn around and come up with the money that they lost in increased tax revenues from the Nature Conservancy, and that falls on us, the taxpayer. We are not in a position at this point anymore where we can afford to pay for land when our seniors are in jeopardy, our veterans are in jeopardy, our education system is in jeopardy. Absolutely not. The APA is rather large, I believe out of control, and the Adirondack Park is big enough.
Thank you, Mrs. Bisso. Mrs. Duprey.
I've said for years the state already owns too much land, and I certainly was opposed to the purchase of the 69,000 acres. On the other hand, Nature Conservancy is a not-for-profit organization that has been paying taxes pending the purchase by the state for the last few years. That would have ended, and it would have been totally tax exempt. They also did a thorough study, which is now being evaluated by DEC, on the best use for the land. For the first time, a great portion of the 69,000 acres is going to be open to the public. It never has been. Some sections will remain in forest preserves. Other parts of the track will be open to the public. For the first time, waterways, kayaking, canoeing, hiking trails will be developed. There are discussions with the local communities on where the best location and connections are for snowmobile trails to increase tourism during the winter months for these communities. That will be economic development. There are designated sustainable forestry units. We don't want the state to purchase land. When it happens, it must be by conservation easements that allow public access and not by fee title, which has happened too often.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Carpenter, 1 minute.
For me, a big part of this is what's the land going to be used for. I understand the theory behind the Adirondack Park. I understand the wilderness. I understand the tourism that it brings and the dollars that it brings into us, but my litmus test is pretty much is it going to create jobs? Is it going to destroy jobs? If that land can still be used for harvestry, where we're not going to lose lumber jobs, people that are doing that in the Adirondack Park as a way to survive, then to me that's pretty big. I would hate to see the state take that property or buy that property and not allow it to be used by the public or anyone else. Before the state bought it, I couldn't go hiking in there. I couldn't go rafting or kayaking or canoeing in there. I had no access to the land, and neither did any of you. Once a state owns it, we all have access to it. We just have to use it in the correct way and control it in the correct way.
All right, thank you. 30 seconds for rebuttal. Mrs. Bisso?
Thank you. I'd like to know what's wrong with private ownership of land and why it needs to be accessed by the public in totality. I believe we have a very large Adirondack Park where people can access waterways and hiking trails, and I think if you speak with people throughout the 115th Assembly District, what you're going to find is that most of the people who are affected by the DEC and the APA are unhappy with the way in which they're using the land.
Thank you. Mrs. Duprey?
The majority of the Adirondack Park has been taken by the state, as I said, under fee title, which means that it remains in forest preserve and there is no public access. The one good part about this purchase is that it's conservation easement. It will be open to the public, even for hunting rights, once the leases on the hunting camps are gone. So it's good news, bad news. Didn't need to buy it. We did. At least it looks like it's going to be used properly.
And Mr. Carpenter, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I really like the land so long as it's used for the public. I spent a lot of time in my past hiking and climbing, being in the mountains and being in the wilderness with a lot of friends of mine. I'd run into a lot of people there, and to have huge chunks of land like that privately owned that no one can do anything with, to me is kind of sad, especially when we're putting ourselves off as a huge tourist industry here. So long as the land is used right, I have no trouble with it.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to our next question now from Betty Ann King with the League of Women Voters. Betty Ann?
Governor Cuomo has directed the legislature to develop a New York State healthcare exchange in compliance with the Affordable Care Act. Per directive, this exchange will allow New Yorkers to compare and purchase health insurance at a reduced cost of coverage for individuals, small businesses, and local governments. The exchange will be entirely financed by the federal government and will help to establish the first ever comparative market to bring down the cost of health insurance. What provisions would you like to see in this coverage?
And we begin with Mrs. Duprey. You have 1 minute.
The health exchange program has certainly been controversial. I think that a great deal of it is going to depend on the federal elections and what happens with the national health care program and whether or not funding will come to the state of New York. We passed legislation in the Assembly that did not pass in the Senate that would have brought millions of dollars of revenue to the state. Some thought that it may be discussed again during the special session that apparently is going to happen sometime in late November or early December. There have been many amendments to the original bill. This is one of those topics that as the bill changes from amendment to amendment, the whole scenario changes. And it is also a topic that until you have the opportunity to read the bill, it's hard to know how to vote. I favor the concept. I think we need to reduce health care costs. Everybody should have health care coverage. It is going to help with the Medicaid expenses in the long run, but I really need to see a bill.
All right, Mr. Carpenter, you're next. 1 minute.
Yeah, I would like to see the bill in its entirety. A lot of that stuff is hard. We say that the federal government is going to totally finance it, but my experience in the city is that when we're told do this and it's going to be financed by us, in the end, you end up pitching in some of the money anyway. So if there's a guarantee of somehow that it's not going to cost the state, that makes it different to me. I like the fact of trying to make things more affordable for our seniors or for those people, for anybody in fact. I like to see affordability for everyone. And a lot of times I think that if we can get together in cooperative groups, we can reduce our costs by scale of what we're buying. And that would go for insurance too. So it's a good idea, but we need to do some research and make sure that it's not going to bite us in the butt in the end.
All right, Mrs. Bisso, 1 minute.
Thank you. Philosophically, I believe that anytime the government gets involved in anything, we're in trouble. So as a direct result of that, I seriously question the bill in the first place. The Plattsburgh teachers and the teachers in the local area get together and they do have a consortium, which they use in order to drive down the costs of their medical insurance. But I do know that since the Obama Healthcare Initiative has come into play, many local municipalities and local unions have actually seen an increase in the cost of their health insurance. So if they say that it's going to save them money, I question whether or not it's going to save them money or bring them back down to the levels that they were at before they brought this up in the first place. So like the others, I would like to see the bill, and I believe that anytime government gets involved in something, we're in trouble.
All right, time for rebuttals. Mrs. Duprey.
I will say that the current system we have just isn't working. My staff and I probably spend 30 to 40% of our time working with constituents and businesses on health insurance issues, very serious issues, people who are facing some incredibly difficult health issues that they need assistance with. So we've got to find a different way to provide health insurance, affordable health insurance for our people.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Mr. Carpenter.
In the end, on the surface, it sounds like a pretty good idea. But I would be curious as to how much of that money that the federal government is going to put into this will go toward actually helping cut down on costs, and how much of it will go toward the amount of money that we need to spend on the bureaucrats running the system. To me, that's kind of interesting to look into.
Thank you. And Mrs. Bisso.
I think if you partner it with education and what's happened with the federal government getting involved in education, they've increased the level of mandates that we need in education, and then they only provided us with $700 million in the state of New York to take care of that. So now when they're going to increase the mandates related to health insurance, I wonder how that's going to extrapolate itself out across our budget. So again, I'm skeptical.
All right, thank you very much. That's the first round of questions from our panelists. This is the point now in the debate where we are going to ask some of the questions that you, our viewers, sent in to us. We are going to begin with Mr. Carpenter, and this is from a viewer who says, with the American Nurses Association endorsement of marijuana as a medicine, how long are folks in the State House going to ignore a natural medicine that can be readily grown, costs next to nothing, has minimal side effects, and with 54% of New Yorkers believing we are wasting money on a war that cannot be won, the question is, do you support legalizing marijuana as medicine in New York State? Mr. Carpenter, 1 minute.
Yes, I definitely do, especially as medicine. As a government, the thing that we're supposed to do is take care of our people, take care of the citizens. Business, the bottom line is profit. Government, the bottom line is welfare for our citizens. Why make these people suffer when we don't have to? I think it's half nuts to be doing that. If there's a medicine or a procedure out there that will help our people who have terminal illness or who are in pain and can't get out of it another way, why do we hold back from them? We wouldn't do it for our pet. We would hate it for our children. I think we're crazy to be doing it for our citizens also.
Mr. Carpenter, thank you. Mrs. Bisso, 1 minute.
I believe that this is a new conversation that we need to have in the state of New York. And as a result of that, and as a result of needing to have a hard conversation, we need to canvass our population in the 115th and find out what their responses are to that. So I would say that as far as I'm concerned, I would like to take a canvass of the population. I'd like to have a conversation about this, see where it ends up, and see where they would direct me to go on this issue.
And Mrs. Duprey, 1 minute.
I do not support medical marijuana as a legal drug. I have reached out to many of the people that I know who are in the medical profession, including oncologists and people who are particularly involved in it. They have told me that they have not had patients in our district that have not been able to respond to drugs that are already available. We have seen other states where the medical marijuana has expanded into some very severe legal issues. Law enforcement has not favored the use of medical marijuana, particularly in the cities. And quite frankly, it's still illegal at the federal level. So the bills that were proposed, and they have cut back now on the amount that somebody could get, but the original bills and the amended version has not been introduced. Anybody who participated in it could have been arrested under federal law. So I think that's something that's got to be addressed in a far bigger venue.
All right, and 30 seconds for rebuttal. Mr. Carpenter.
I have no problem with medical marijuana being prescribed by a doctor to a patient who has no other means for relief. I think we're wrong to make those people suffer if this can help. And I'm not just talking about marijuana. Anything that can help, we have to use it.
Thank you. Mrs. Bisso?
As I've done in the past over the last 8 months, most of what I've been doing is speaking with people. And I contend again that that's what I would need to do, is go out and speak with the people, find out what their stand is, do the research, and then come up with how they would like me to represent them on this issue.
And Mrs. Duprey? All right, very good. We will move along. Time to begin the second round of questions now. For this round, we will begin with Pat Bradley. And this question will be going to Mrs. Bisso first.
Mrs. Bisso, during the Republican primary, an editorial in the Adirondack Daily Enterprise said that you come, quote, across as someone who, if elected, would rather do damage than solve problems, unquote. What is the primary problem that you perceive in Albany, and how would you solve it without doing damage?
Well, first of all, I don't know why you would say I prefer to do damage than to solve problems, because that's not the truth at all. And I know where that statement came from. I think the primary problem right now in Albany is that we're not all working toward the same goal. You know, it's either Democrats or Republicans, upstate or downstate. What we need to do is unite on issues that we can all agree upon. And I don't believe that that would cause any damage. As a matter of fact, I believe that that would solve a lot of problems. We have waste, fraud, and corruption issues going on in Albany. We have difficulty with our Medicaid system across the state that I haven't heard a single person say is not a problem. I think that what needs to happen is you need to use good interpersonal skills, you need to have a great voice, you need to have a great understanding of the people that you represent, and you need to go down and you need to find people who will work directly with you. Those people may be in the same party as you, or they may not, but you don't reach across the aisle for the sake of doing that and call it bipartisanship and then give away the farm from the North Country to downstate. So I believe that I would go down, I would build relationships, and I would find people who believe that the state of New York is worth saving and we can agree on the direction that we're going to go in.
Thank you. Mrs. Duprey, 1 minute.
I find the question a little difficult because it was directed first on a specific issue, but I will address the fact that I've been accused of being too bipartisan. I certainly have worked with the governor and members of the legislature working together to turn this state around. We have a very strong committee structure in the Assembly. Every single committee is chaired by a Democrat. And the only way that we get things done for the North Country is to be strong in committees and get influence, absolutely, for those who live in the 115th District and other parts of the North Country. I'm a ranking member of the Government Operations Committee, which is one of the most important committees in the Assembly. We have a lot of great discussions. I have influenced bills before they ever got to the floor. I also serve on corrections, ethics, higher education, real property, and I'm the only Republican on the subcommittee on autism. So working together is the only way that we get things done across the country, much less upstate, downstate than there ever was before since the last 2 years.
All right, and Mr. Carpenter, a minute.
Yeah, the thing we really need in Albany, or anywhere actually, is communication and cooperation. We need to work together. I've been very successful here in the city working with people from multiple political parties, working with unions, with management, with taxpayers, by talking and communicating them. I will bring that to Albany, and I believe that we need to find a way to work together, and that it is possible, and that the most pressing need right now is the economy. And we need to get everybody thinking about how to straighten out the economy and what needs to be done for it.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Bisso, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Sure, I believe working together is critical, but I don't believe that you give up the farm in the process of that. So what I will use as an example for that is why is downstate legislating outdoor wood boilers for upstate? It's an upstate issue, it's a home rule issue. That's what I believe. So while it's important for us to work together, it's also important to have a good, strong voice for the North Country and to go down and say absolutely not to issues that don't affect them but affect us.
Thank you. Mrs. Duprey, 30 seconds.
Well, let's talk reality. There's 150 members of the New York State Assembly. 100 are Democrats, 50 are Republicans. 65 Democrats come from the city of New York. You need 76 votes to pass a bill in the Assembly. That's the same issue with environmental issues. If New York City wants it, they only need to pick up 11 votes from across the rest of the state. It's very difficult. We need to work together. We need to convince them of what we have here and what we need to do here. But if they plant their feet, there is nothing that's going to move that block of votes.
All right, and Mr. Carpenter, 30 seconds to wrap it up.
Yeah, it's true that if we don't have cooperation from those people in Albany, we don't get anywhere. No one does. We need to find a way to work together for the common good of all of us. And I believe I can bring that to Albany.
All right, thank you very much. Next question is from Betty Ann King.
While it is true that no permits have yet been issued for high-volume hydrofracturing. And our district is not sitting on Marcellus Shale. And there is evidence that permitting will be postponed until the Department of Environmental Conservation has completed its review of the thousands of responses of public hearings and to the draft Environmental Public Agency impact study. The transport of toxic waters and the location of disposal sites remain a concern for the 115th Assembly District. What legislation would you propose and support to ensure that all byproducts from this process meet standards of safety as outlined by the Environmental Protection Agency?
And Mrs. Duprey, we begin with you. 1 minute.
Hydrofracking is certainly becoming a huge issue in the state. The governor just announced at the end of last week that he has now asked Commissioner Shaw and the State Health Department to do a study about the health concerns associated with the watershed. I support the number of jobs that would come out of the drilling for natural gas throughout the state of New York. There's certainly thousands of jobs that the western part of the state has depended upon for years. The concern, obviously, is the safety of the watershed in New York City. I've continued to talk to my colleagues. They're going to propose a lot of bills and have proposed a lot of bills. Until it's another one. The DEC has not issued their report. The final legislation will be based upon the DEC's report, now the Health Department report. I will support hydrofracking for the natural gas benefits that the state, the country will receive. It's huge in the Marcellus Shale template, but it has to be safe for those who depend upon that watershed. So again, the proof will be in what the bill says at the very end.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter, 1 minute.
Yeah, the hydrofracturing issue is a pretty important issue. I've signed an online petition as an elected official in New York State, asking New York State to hold off on making a decision until further studies can be done so that we can be sure that, number one, it's environmentally safe, number two, that it's economically sound. I think that's important that we know everything about it before we make a decision, either yes or no. There are definitely benefits that can be brought out of it, but as you stated, there are definitely negatives, and we have to weigh the two against each other. At this point, I'm kind of against it, but I would like to see more studies done. I'd like to have more information.
Thank you. Mrs. Bisso?
I think that anybody who knows anything about what's going on with hydrofracking just needs to go to the southern tier of New York State, stand in the town of Waverly, look across the border to Pennsylvania and see all the jobs leaving the state of New York and going to Pennsylvania, because that's what's been happening. I think Pennsylvania has done a great job of taking a look at just the things that you're concerned with, and I believe that our state will do the same as well. And exactly what you talked about proposing should be proposed. But I also am in favor of hydrofracking as a means of bringing jobs into this state. But I do believe that, just as you said, we need to make sure that it's safe and that it's responsible, and I'm certain that our people in government will take care of that and make sure that that's possible. And when they do, those jobs will hopefully come back to the southern tier, come back to New York State, and we'll be in direct competition with Pennsylvania for those jobs. All
right, rebuttals now. Mrs. Duprey?
Just to finalize my comments, that I really believe the economic value is huge for the state. One of the greatest amount of the emails that are coming in right now is people are concerned about the high cost of fuel oil coming up this winter, the high cost of gasoline. It's there to help bring down the costs, and if we can find a safe way to do it. I have tremendous respect for Commissioner Joe Martens. He's not going to approve something that he doesn't believe is safe.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yeah, again, I just want to make sure it's safe. I mean, we tout the environment up here in this area, but we rely upon it in order to bring in a lot of money through tourism for us. And for that reason, we really need to make sure that this is a safe process before we move forward and do it. It's a great economic engine, and I wouldn't mind it. I just want to be sure it's safe.
And Mrs. Bisso?
Thank you. Joe Martens has a history of going and exceeding and going beyond what is necessary in order to make sure that things are environmentally safe, to the tune of making things sometimes difficult, especially within the Adirondack Park. So I do happen to agree that if he gives it his thumbs up, then it probably is incredibly safe. So again, I'm for hydrofracking as a means of assisting the state with economic development.
All right. Thank you very much. Our next question from Joe Lotemplio.
Let's roll the dice here a little bit, shall we say. The governor has talked about legalizing gambling in New York State as a means of boosting the economy. He says it's already here anyways with racinos and lottery and a number of different forms. What are your thoughts on legalizing gambling in the Empire State?
For this question, we begin with Mr. Carpenter. 1 minute.
Yeah, in truth, gambling is already here. I would think you'd have a hard time going to just about any workplace and not being able to find football tickets during this time of year, which is gambling and not necessarily legal. I go back to my litmus test. Will it increase jobs? Will it destroy jobs? If it's done and regulated in the correct way, it increases jobs and it brings in tax dollars, and people want to do it as it is. So I don't have too much trouble with gambling so long as we keep an eye on it and we regulate it. We already gamble. We sell lottery tickets that supposedly the money from there goes to education. I'd like to know if we have a outline of where the money from these casinos or the other gambling that we want to make legal is going to go. But yeah, I don't really have too much trouble with gambling. Like I said, it's here already.
All right, Mr. Carpenter, thank you. Mrs. Bisso.
I think if you speak with the people in Brazier Falls and in Fort Covington and across the northern tier of New York State who are already employed through the Mohawk casinos, I think that they might have a problem with the competition with New York State. I think we also can't forget about the fact that we have a gaming compact in place, and we have to honor that. So as far as whether it's here or it's not, I think we have we've established ourselves with the Mohawk tribe. Akwesasne is in effect, and we also have some issues going on with Ganianka. I believe that we should honor those compacts and then decide where we move further. But I don't believe that we can break the gaming compact.
Mrs. Bisso, thank you. Mrs. Duprey, 1 minute.
Well, we stood at a press conference recently and we're told that the #1 request from people who got online is for a direct flight from Plattsburgh to Las Vegas. So I think that there's no question that people are looking for places to go gambling. Let's bear in mind that this will require a constitutional amendment. I voted for the governor's first proposal and the legislation that passed in this past session. The new legislature has to pass the same legislation in the next 2 years in order for the proposal to be on the ballot for the voters of the state of New York to make the final decision. It's not a decision that the governor or the legislature will be making alone, and we'll see where the voters go. I think that there's no doubt there's a lot of money to be made, there's a lot of income. The issue right now, the gaming compacts have kind of fallen apart, and the Native Americans are not sharing their revenue with the state as they were required to do under those compacts. So the state's looking for revenue. It's something that's there. It's something that people want.
Thank you. Mrs. Duprey. Mr. Carpenter, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, gambling's everywhere, and you know, as human beings, it's a part of our makeup. It's the way we are. We gamble to get a mate. We gamble to find food. I took a gamble to come up here and talk to you people about this. Everywhere you go, people are actively gambling as it is. Let's find a way to get some money out of it and to make it an economic engine for us. I think it's a good idea.
Thank you. Mrs. Bisso.
Thank you. One thing I can guarantee you is that I will look at this through open eyes and listen to all sides of the story, both as an economic impact and the impact with the Gaming Commission. But I would not, unlike the Assemblywoman, take money from the New York State Gaming Commission before I make my decision. So I will guarantee you that.
All right. Thank you. And Mrs. Duprey, you have final word on this?
I didn't take any money from the Gaming Commission prior to my vote, and it was a very small amount. I don't remember what it was. And it came from an attorney, not from the Gaming Commission.
All right, we are going to move on to the next question that was sent in by our viewers. Just to let you know, we did receive several questions. What we did is we took all of the questions and put them in a hat and pulled them out to determine exactly what order we would be asking them. This is a little specific. It has to do with Saranac Lake, and the question for the candidates is how can the Saranac Lake community find a way to resolve the cost and inefficiency of a village that exists in 3 towns and 2 counties? Is it not possible to resolve this in New York State law? And we begin this round with Mrs. Bisso. Right. 1 minute.
Well, maybe they should look to St. Lawrence County and how they feel right now being divided into 4 different assembly districts. So I can I can certainly understand what they must be feeling. There has to be a way to take care of that situation because as St. Lawrence County is experiencing right now, they do not feel as though they have great representation in any particular direction because they are so fractured. So there must be a way to take care of that. I do believe that all good government starts at the local level. And as a result of that, I'm sure that when all people get together and figure out how they want to move forward, that they'll be able to resolve the problem and then access whatever they need from a state jurisdiction. So I'd like to see them obviously take the time to continue the investigation that they have into their situation and then look to the state not as a resolver of the situation, but as perhaps maybe an assistant in developing what it is they need.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Duprey?
It's a nightmare. And you know, because of the way the county lines and the town lines are set up, you can't just arbitrarily change them. I was able, through my bipartisan efforts, to get Assemblyman Bob Sweeney to sponsor legislation that allowed us to transfer state land in one county to help the village of Saranac Lake with their water district. So things can happen because we do work together. With Teresa Sayward and me as the assembly members, it's been pretty smooth because we didn't ever really figure out where the center line was that separated the districts. I hope that continues. You know, we've worked for all of the district. It's incredibly difficult, and I think that you can't change the lines. The lines will not change. So the better part of that is to figure out ways to work together, to get the communities to work together. And I've sat with most of them, the elected officials, several times over the past few years, and will continue to do that as their administration changes.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carpenter, 1 minute.
That's a tough nut to crack, most definitely. And it's not a new problem with Saranac Lake. They've been a member of 2 different counties for a while. It comes down to, again, cooperation and communication. We need to get counties working together, municipalities working together, and when you talk about the assembly, because there's 2 different assembly people that will be presented, it's important that those assembly members will work together. No matter what the level of government is, if we can cooperate and communicate, we can solve those problems, and that's what I look forward to doing.
All right, it's time for rebuttals now. Mrs. Duprey? Mr. Carpenter, you have the last word if you'd like it.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, well, we are moving on to our next question from another one of our viewers. It asked, the North Country Regional Economic Development Council was given more than $100 million last year as part of a statewide competition to award economic grant money. Do you believe, as Governor Cuomo has said, this encourages the 10 regions of New York to customize effective economic development plans, or do you believe that the economic grant money could be used in a better way? And for this round, we begin with Mrs. Duprey. 1 minute.
I think one of the best ideas that Governor Cuomo has had is developing 10 regional economic development councils across the state. You know, for years, the grants, and I've supported thousands of grants, literally thousands of grants from local municipalities that all went to Albany for somebody in Albany or New York City to make a decision. Those requests now go to local people, local volunteers who sit on that council. They put in untold number of hours. They carefully deliberate where the best priorities are. They prioritize, and they've come up with some great plans last year and some great ones again this year. I think we can be proud of what we've done with the economic development councils. And you know, it was an incredibly proud moment for all of us across the North Country to stand on the stage with the governor, with the lieutenant governor, and with Tony Collins and Gary Douglas accepting the second highest award in the state of New York at $103.2 million last year. We're looking for a repeat this year.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carpenter, 1 minute.
Yeah, it's a little bit early for us to determine whether this was good or bad. I'm in favor of trying new things, especially when the old things don't really work necessarily as well as we wish they did. I have the benefit of being able to live in a district that actually came up with a good chunk of the money, so I'm pretty happy about that. But let's give it a year or 2 to develop, and we'll see if it actually works as good as we think it's going to. I like the fact that those councils are populated by people who are active in the communities, who do have a hand in economic development and have been working on that for years in the past. So they bring a lot of experience into this that an actual politician wouldn't. So I do like the makeup of it, and yeah, let's try it and see. I think it's a great idea.
All right, Mr. Carpenter, thank you. Mrs. Bisso.
Thank you. I believe it's nothing more than a duplication of the Obama failed stimulus plan. $870 to $890 billion at the federal level, $870 million at the state level. When we're apportioning $300,000 in order to counsel first-time homeowners, we're spending $10 million to repair 34 miles of a railroad track to an abandoned paper mill. When we're utilizing monies and picking winners and losers in the area of business, and our taxpayer dollars are going there, I think it's a problem. I too would also like to see how it ferrets itself out at the end, just like Mr. Carpenter, and actually see a report card on how well it's done. But as far as I'm concerned, when you have seniors who can't transport Meals on Wheels 70 miles a day because they don't have a good vehicle, and we're assigning $200,000 to a mobile chicken plucker truck in St. Lawrence County that to this day has not plucked a single chicken, I think we have a problem with where we are spending our money.
All right, rebuttals, Mrs. Duprey.
Many of the grants over the years that have gone down to Albany and New York, they're decided by bureaucrats who don't know the North Country, don't know the difference between the town of Plattsburgh and, quite frankly, the small communities of Bangor and Bombay. I think that having the local volunteers evaluating these grant proposals and making these decisions has certainly, beyond a shadow of a doubt, been an economic benefit to the North Country and will continue to be so.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. 30 seconds.
Yeah, win or lose, I will be watching this to see how it turns out. I think it's important to try new things. And when we try something new, it's very important to mark it and watch it and see if it actually works for us or doesn't.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Bisso.
When we give $2.5 million to a company that made $9.7 billion last year, and in the first 6 months of 2012 brought in $4.17 billion, and has on hand last year $176 million, and over the last 2.5 years $1.73 billion, and we give them $2.5 million, I really think that that's an injustice.
Thank you very much. That wraps that up. Back to our panelists now, and Joe Lotemplio for the next question.
Thanks, Tom. Education, as we all know, is an important part of our society. And the state came up with a plan this year, APPR, I believe it's called, a new way to evaluate teachers. From what I'm hearing out there, there's a lot of problems with this. It's heaped on hours and hours of administration work, and the results of the evaluations are also being questioned. I'd like to know your thoughts on this evaluation system and how we can better that system and our schools in general.
Mr. Carpenter, this time we begin with you.
Yeah, the education thing is pretty interesting to me, to be truthful. We spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money on making sure that we educate our children so that our children can get out and can compete in the job market and can get good jobs and support a family and do well. We invest this money from New York State into our children. When I invest at home, I invest in something that's going to benefit me in the end. This money that we invest in at this point goes to the kids who are leaving our communities because we do not have jobs here for the communities. I think we need to concentrate as much or more into creating jobs, because it doesn't make sense for me to invest all my money in the kids so that they can go to Massachusetts or they can go to Texas or they can go to Florida or somewhere else, and then those states get the return on the investment that we've put in. We need to concentrate on finding a way to build jobs and to keep our children here.
Thank you. Mrs. Bisso, 1 minute.
APPR is an enormous beast at the educational level. The only thing growing in the state of New York right now is the state education department, to the tune of $50 an hour, which is what they're paying people to evaluate the plans that are being submitted by each and every person in the state of New York. If you can imagine, every teacher has to create a plan, a student learning objective, and that plan has to be submitted to the state of New York. It has to be evaluated and approved and then sent back. Then every teacher is evaluated on 96 criteria points. And then at the end of the year, we are the only profession where we cannot give our own test nor score it. It has to be done by another person, not in our classroom. What other professional is treated in that manner? We do have teachers that may need to improve and do need to improve, and I think we probably can all remember one or two in our past. If we have good administration and a mechanism in place so that those teachers don't continue and then allow good teachers to continue, I don't believe the APPR system was necessary.
Mrs. Bisso, thank you. Mrs. Duprey.
It's certainly going to cost too much. It's going to take too much administrative time. It's going to take too many teachers out of the classroom when they should be in there teaching. Too much emphasis on test scores and no provision for special education students. I voted at the last day that we possibly could, very late in the evening, for the APPR program, because had we not voted that night, every single teacher evaluation would have been open to the public and placed on the internet. That would have been the final absolute atrocity of this bill. I don't think any personnel evaluation should be made public, And with our vote that last night, we were able to pull it back. The APPR was going into effect. At least we saved the teachers from having anything public. You know how people misinterpret everything that gets put on the internet. So bad program. I hope it gets amended in the next session. I don't see how it can possibly work to the benefit of our students or our teachers or the administration.
Mrs. Duprey, thank you. It's time for rebuttals. Mr. Carpenter, 30 seconds. Mrs. Bisso?
First of all, it would never take teachers out of the classroom, because good teachers wouldn't take their time out of the classroom. They would take their time away from their free time at home or with their families. And that's what is actually ending up happening. Furthermore, I don't believe that we should vote for a bill because it's the best of the worst. I think that we should put it aside and create it and make it better. And as Assemblywoman Duprey just said, it's going to need to be amended, which means more time, more tax dollars, and it should have been done right in the first place. And I would never have voted for that bill, just as I would not have voted for Tier 6, because both are bad bills.
Mrs. Duprey, 30 seconds.
I want to clarify that when I said take teachers out of the classroom, taking them out to do these evaluations and to be part of the evaluations. Those are going to be done, and it's too much time. Something like 6 hours for each one. It's just crazy. And most of our teachers, the vast majority, are incredibly dedicated and do a tremendous job. This is an unnecessary piece of legislation.
All right, thank you very much. We don't have time for a full round of questions, but we do have time for one question where we'll ask you each for a 30-second response. And this question has to deal with minimum wage. A viewer asked, some New York politicians want to increase the minimum wage in New York State over 3 years to $8.50 an hour. Would you vote to increase the minimum wage? And Mrs. Bisso, we'll start with you, 30 seconds.
Absolutely not. I think it would destroy small businesses. Minimum wage was designed for entry-level positions and not to fund a family. So I believe that in order to save small businesses and to make sure we have the number of jobs that we need, because what will happen with an increased minimum wage is fewer people will actually get those jobs, because there won't be as much money, and it'll hurt small business. So no, I do not.
Mrs. Duprey, 30 seconds.
I did not support Speaker Silver's bill that he was ready to introduce, which did not get introduced in this past session. I, again, don't know if this is going to be placed back on the agenda when we go back in a month or so. If it is, I understand there may be some significant changes to his bill and some tax credits for small businesses and some changes in the way the minimum wage going forward will be structured. It cannot be tied to the gross product. So again, the proof is in when the bill is submitted to us, and this is something that's a work in progress.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I come down to my litmus test. Will this create jobs or destroy jobs? The way I see it, it's going to destroy jobs. It's not going to be a good thing. Those businesses that were on the bubble or that are on the bubble aren't going to be able to increase their minimum wage without a loss of workers. If we had more jobs and the jobs were competing for workers as opposed to the workers were competing for jobs, then those businesses who wanted quality workers would be raising what they're paying them. So I'm against it.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Carpenter, and we're going to come right back to you. It is time now for closing statements. Everyone will have 2 minutes, and Mr. Carpenter, we begin with you.
Yeah, again, as you've probably heard as you listened, what's important to me is job creation. I think we need to work on that. I think every bill, every debate, everything that comes up in Albany should be considered. Is this going to destroy jobs, or is this going to create jobs? If it's something that has no effect on jobs, then we talk about it. But if it has the effect that it's going to destroy jobs, do we need to do it now? Is it something that's timely and has to be done? And what are the benefits if it's going to destroy jobs? Because in order to turn this economy around, in order to turn our state around, in order to turn our country around, we need to put people back to work. We need to get them off the unemployment rolls. We need to find good paying jobs for our students that were graduating from college, that were graduating from high school, that we're spending all this money on to give them a good education. We have to have jobs for them. And once we can get that happening, once we can start the jobs being built, it will snowball on itself and go over and over. So I believe strongly that that's probably the toughest thing that's facing us, and that it should be extremely important to all debates that are going on, not just in Albany, but elsewhere. And if we can change things in this state, as we should, then we can lead the nation in changing the nation, as we should. I believe strongly in this state, I believe strongly in this district, and I believe strongly in the American way of life. And I think that we need to go after a way to create more jobs.
Mr. Carpenter, thank you very much. Mrs. Bisso, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Job creation and good sustainable job growth is critical, but what's also critical is that we have a voice in Albany. I haven't been campaigning for the last 8 months and the last 24,000 miles that I've put on my car. What I've been doing is listening to people, and I've been doing what it is I believe this job should be in the future. And so I'd like to leave you in the last 29 days, you've had an opportunity to meet all 3 candidates. I've sat with coalition groups, I've sat with county leaders, I've sat with county administrators, I've toured different factories, I've toured different establishments and businesses. I've sat in people's living rooms, I've tasted the disgusting water of the Dannemora Homeowners Association that's been contaminated by the DOT salt shed. I've spoken with them about solutions to these problems. What I can guarantee you is that there'll be some procedural changes should I be elected your next Assemblywoman. One of those things will be returning to you a voice to be able to deliver to Albany. And I believe that we need to readdress and go back to the time when people had an opportunity to actually discuss how they felt about issues before they were voted on. So it's really your concerns that go to Albany, and not Albany's concerns coming back to you. I want to change the direction of the message, and I certainly want it to be strong for the North Country. Thank you for today.
Thank you, Mrs. Bisso. Mrs. Duprey.
Thank you, and thanks again to the League, to PBS, and to the panelists. We've discussed a lot of issues here today, and I think it's certainly clear there are significant differences between my opponents and me. The record shows we are moving forward with economic development, with millions of dollars in road and bridge construction, jobs at companies like Nova Bus and Bombardier, the St. Lawrence Natural Gas Pipeline, which will reduce the fuel costs at Macadam Cheese by $1 million, providing an outlet for over 200 local farms for their dairy products. Once the frivolous lawsuits are done, the Adirondack Club and Resort in Tupper Lake will create over 500 jobs. My success is a direct result of my ability to work effectively with people of all parties, local governments, businesses, and labor groups to continue to build our economy. I've received the endorsement of such diverse groups as Unshackle Upstate, one of only 30 out of 212 legislators, National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Association of Builders and Contractors, the NRA, NYSET, SEIU 1199 and Local 200, IBEW 910, and for the 6th time, I'm a member of the Circle of Friends from the Farm Bureau. Not one of these groups agrees with all of my votes, but they know I listen to them respectfully, study issues thoroughly, discuss their concerns, and cast my vote for what I truly believe is in the best interest of this Assembly District. We've passed 2 consecutive on-time budgets, eliminating a $13.5 billion deficit while keeping spending under the rate of inflation, without any new taxes, fees, or gimmicks. We're on the road to recovery, and I'm asking for support on Election Day so I can continue to be part of the efforts to rebuild our Empire State. Thank you.
Mrs. Duprey, thank you. And candidates, thanks for a great debate, and thank you all for participating tonight. Also, our thanks to Joe Lotemplio, Pat Bradley, and Betty Ann King for asking the questions, as well as our partners with the League of Women Voters. And for those of you watching at home and online and all across Northern New York, our thanks to you as well. Please remember to vote on Tuesday, November 6th, and thank you for watching, and have a good night.